All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, Coffee and Compliance. Today we're going to be chatting a little bit about some of the issues facing the construction materials industry. I'm really excited to have Michele Stanley of NSSGA on today, talking about some of the kind of at a federal level, some of the environmental regulatory trends and issues that she's tracking for members. So very much excited to have you here today, Michele. Thanks for joining us. Michele is the VP of Government and Regulatory Affairs, a wealth of experience on Capitol Hill and dealing with federal issues. So thank you very much for being here today, Michele.
Yes, thank you for having me. Really excited to be on today.
Yeah, so I guess to kick things off, can you just give a quick overview of your role and who the association really represents in terms of industry, just to set the context for discussion today?
Absolutely. So NSSGA represents the companies that own rock quarries and sand pits, along with some of the industrial sand companies across the country. And then our, what we call M&S, or our manufacturing and service members, are the folks that sell to our members. So everybody from Capital One to John Deere, Caterpillar, and then the companies that make all the parts for crushers and belts and things like that. My role within the association is, as you mentioned, the Vice President of Government and Regulatory Affairs. So my team is made up of lobbyists that lobby Capitol Hill, as well as regulatory specialists that focus on environment, safety, workforce, all kind of engineering and technical issues with FHWA and FAA. And then we have someone who focuses on the industrial sand issues and energy. And then we also have somebody on staff who focuses on grassroots and political activities. NSSGA has a political action committee that supports all of our advocacy efforts on the political side. And so my team has that person that runs that for us too.
And you're primarily focused at a federal level on issues impacting your members in the association, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Federal advocacy on legislative and regulatory issues, I would say, and kind of our overarching issues on at least the environmental side that we work on for our members are permitting at the federal level. And then how some of those requirements at the state level feed into the federal level permits.
Cool. Now, so just for the audience today, we're going to stay at a kind of a federal level when talking about a lot of these issues. I know some of our other coffee and compliance webinars, we've kind of gone deep on specific state issues, but with Michele today, we're going to stay at a federal level. I guess to kick things off, one of the current topics, the Inflation Reduction Act. Michele, can you talk a little bit about how that's impacting industry and what that's meant now that it's actually moving forward?
Sure. I mean, I will say the bill is being signed into law today. We are still trying to kind of dissect all of the different sections of the bill and see how it will affect our members, kind of specifically the tax provisions. Though with some of the changes that were made, most of our bigger companies already pay 15% corporate tax. So we, haven't been as concerned with that piece. There is an entire environment and public works section towards the end of the bill that focuses on the House and the Senate's priorities on climate change and carbon reduction. And so some of those sections are really what we're diving into. And we worked pretty heavily with Senate EPW minority, so the Republicans, to get some revisions to one of the sections that would provide EPA with $100 million to establish an environmental product declaration labeling program for construction materials. The original language gave a lot of authority to EPA, and so we worked to get some of that authority rolled back, and are just kind of interested in how that's all going to play out in the rulemaking process.
Yeah, on the EPD front, what do you see for your members kind of over the next coming years? Do you see that increasing greatly? What's the impact you see on the industry?
Yeah, I do see it increasing greatly, especially on FHWA projects. I know FHWA is very interested in making it mandatory. NSSGA has actually been working for the last year and a half on our new PCR, a product category rule, because our previous one was up last year, so it had been 5 years since ASTM did the original one. And since we were doing a PCR update, it just made sense for us to finally do an aggregate EPD. So we have contracted with someone to help us put together that software for our members to be able to use. And we're actually going to be rolling that out in September at our Legislative and Policy Forum.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, we see it from just across the industry. EPDs for anyone in the building construction materials is just kind of table stakes at this point, as the whole environment goes in that direction.
Yep, and I mean, as you know, it depends on what state you're in right now. And I think you're going to see it rolled out more across broadly. One of the things that we were very concerned about this original language in IRA related to EPDs was that they were trying to compare products to products. So, concrete to steel or concrete to wood, right? Which is not the way that EPDs are supposed to be used. And so we definitely voiced our members' concerns on that front, and we're able to get some of those changes in IRA. So.
Cool. Anything else from the Inflation Reduction Act that you're tracking as it relates to the construction materials and aggregates industry?
Yeah, there are a couple sections that were related to low carbon construction materials and FHWA projects and giving them additional discretionary money in order to roll out those low carbon materials. Billions of dollars, in fact. So we are, trying to put together kind of a write-up and a list of how our members could actually apply for some of those dollars. I know a lot of our members are already doing some research on their own in order to make, whether it's low carbon concrete, low carbon cement, low carbon asphalt. So really want to just, make sure that our members know how much money is really out there for them to do some of this switchover and some of that research on their own. So.
Cool. Yeah, and if the bill's getting signed today, I'm sure there'll be some little bit more digging into it once it actually comes out and in place.
Exactly. Yep.
I guess somewhat related to that, you talked about, working with the minority party in terms of getting some of the provisions. With the Biden administration, what's been the biggest learning or surprise as the Biden administration has kind of settled in and over the past, couple of years?
Honestly, one of the biggest surprises to our industry has been how they are implementing the infrastructure bill and how they're putting policies and regulations in place that actually make it more difficult for that money to get pushed out the door and really slow down a lot of that money and slow down the processes. Anything, I could go on and on the list of regulations that they're putting on some of this money. So we've really just been following a lot of that and, doing our comments to DOT when necessary, doing outreach to OMB and doing a lot of contacts with our Republican friends because they're the ones who are willing to push back on a lot of this. It just seems kind of counterproductive to us that they're putting a lot of these parameters on how the money is to be spent when they need to get $1 trillion out the door.
Yeah, have you noticed any specific trends or themes? Is there a specific issue or requirements that's being put on the money across the board, or is it just wherever there are additional restrictions?
Across the board, it's anti-emissions. So any way that they can, put parameters on those funds for whether it's no new capacity, no additional lanes, giving preference to projects that are for trails, or I forget which NOFO it was, but one of the grant programs, it said that they were going to give preference to projects that were for walking, cycling, and rolling So I don't know the last time I saw anybody roller skating to work, but yeah, I mean, I would say in general, it's just the cutting emissions piece. And they're actually, you know, these parameters that they're putting on the money were not included in the law for good reason, because that was something that wasn't bipartisan. And so now that they're trying to get their priorities implemented via regulation. So.
And in terms of the funding, is it going to how much of it is to other infrastructure projects like water, sewer, beyond just roads? And are you seeing the same kind of like restrictions and slowdowns there?
Yeah, a lot of the same language they're putting on all of the money. The highway bridge portion was $600 billion, and really the bill was really only about a $950 billion bill. So about 2/3 of the money goes to highways and bridges, and the rest is water infrastructure, broadband, electric grid, EVs. What else am I forgetting? Airports, ports. But yeah, they're generally putting the same kind of restrictions on a lot of that money.
And why do you think, why aren't we trying to get the money out the door into critical infrastructure faster? I mean, my view is that investing in infrastructure creates a number of jobs, I mean, across the board. Why isn't there more of a push to get that money out the door for this infrastructure? And personally, from like the water side, I love seeing the funding and the investment in the water infrastructure across the board, because it's so outdated for stormwater, sewers, all of it.
I think it really depends on what pot of money it's coming from, because they have done a good job on getting some categories of the money out quickly, but some of it is taking a lot longer. I haven't seen what the numbers are, but it just, from what we're hearing from some of our members out in the States, the state money for highways is coming out slower than some of the water money or some of the energy infrastructure money is getting out the door a lot quicker.
Yeah, do you see overlap at all between the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Act on certain issues around like EV and other energy or kind of transit issues?
Overlap in the sense that they're getting more money because the Inflation Reduction Act wasn't supposed to be new policy. It was supposed to simply add money to existing programs. And so that's the EV money that was in the IRA was focused on those programs that technically were already existing because of IIJA. So they just upped a lot of those programs on the discretionary side.
Got it. Cool.
Yep.
Anything else with the Biden administration that's been kind of interesting or surprising as you've gone, the past couple of years? Is there anything else from a member or construction materials industry perspective?
I mean, they've had a pretty large focus on Department of Labor regulations. So not only MSHA, which is what our members are mostly regulated by, but also OSHA, as well as some of the more like personal labor sort of issues. So they're trying to do Davis-Bacon on construction materials for the first time, add new requirements for PLAs. There's also the OSHA heat injury and illness prevention reg that's out there. So the Department of Labor has just been very active pushing out a bunch of regulations. And that, honestly, that's where we're hearing a lot of pushback from our members across the board, no matter what state they're in.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard about an uptick from an OSHA and especially MSHA standpoint in terms of like post-COVID, people are showing up on site more. We're seeing more inspections. I don't know if you've seen similar like increase in enforcement activity on your end too.
Yeah, MSHA has been very clear that they're increasing enforcement, specifically on the silica side. They haven't, I mean, they've said they're going to start their silica rule. They've had an RFI, but they haven't actually put out a rule yet. And so They're heavily enforcing their existing rule, prior to putting out their new one. And yeah, we've heard that from our members quite a bit, that they might have, over the 2 years, they might have seen one inspector, and now they're seeing, they're definitely hitting their 2s and 4s now.
Yep. In terms, shifting gears completely, in terms of like air water issues, what are you seeing kind of top of mind on the air and water side for the industry?
So on the air side, particulate matter is definitely at the top of our list. The standards for air that go into the air permits, the state air permits, and other standards that impact all of our operations. The EPA is likely to retain their coarse particulate standard for PM10 in their upcoming proposed rule. That's one, I think it's every 5 years they have to do an update to PM10. This continues to be an area of major NSSGA success, actually. We put together a coalition 2 years ago to help persuade the current standard continuing to move forward, and for it not to go backwards. And so that's something we've been really active in. We also are following the fine particulate standard for PM 2.5. We think that the EPA is probably going to reduce that one, and so we're engaging with our members on that to try to quantify what the burden will be to our membership as we put together our comments. And then, of course, WOTUS is always at the top of that list, but the White House hasn't really indicated that it'll be delayed or not. And then on the water side, the surface water permits, the multi-sector general permit, we had some success pushing back on the worst proposed parts of that. It's only used by a few states, but it informs all state permits, which would have required additional and unnecessarily sampling and costs for our membership. And we also put together recently a NSSGA fact sheet. So if folks haven't seen that yet, I would love to send that along for folks on the call to see our fact sheet.
Yeah, that'd be awesome, because I think even if you're in a state that's not under the federal multi-sector general permit, that is the starting point for so many state industrial or multi-sector permits, and we see that trickle down effect a lot of whatever's happening at the federal EPA, MSGP show up in the California or the Texas or whatever whenever they go to write their permit. That's the trend. On WOTUS, can you go a little deeper on that and just share where are we at between the Biden administration, what's going on with Supreme Court decisions, what's the kind of lay of the land for WOTUS right now?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of moving pieces. So EPA has indicated that a final WOTUS rule, formally withdrawing the 2020 Trump rule and expanding authority over which waters require federal permits, would be released in August. We haven't seen that yet. The White House usually takes 2 months, but they haven't put it out yet. And we have recently heard from them that they've indicated that the rule would appear this year. So we're kind of just sitting and waiting. It's possible that they might pause that because there are quite a few members of Congress and industry groups like NSSGA who have urged EPA to pause their rulemaking until that Supreme Court case has been heard. And I don't know if folks have heard, but NSSGA filed an amicus with the road builders that focus specifically on the transportation infrastructure side of how it would affect our members and why that was important to infrastructure. But the hearing is currently scheduled to happen on October 3rd for the Sackett case, with a final decision by the Supreme Court in the first half of 23. So, we are really expecting that to limit the federal authority under WOTUS just because of the current makeup of the Supreme Court and the, decisions that we've seen come out over the last even 6 months. You know, we have been very active on this issue, both with EPA and on the Hill and on the litigation side. So we will definitely continue to be involved and push out as much information as we can as things move forward. But we're really anticipating a final decision by spring of next year.
Yeah, and do you see any signs that the Biden administration may hold off on putting out their own waters of the US until after that court decision comes out, just to not have something come out that potentially gets rolled back or by the courts?
Yeah, I mean, right now, all kind of arrows are indicating that they will hold off, but we haven't been told that formally. And, you know, with some of their successes as of lately, I could see that they just want to continue racking up some successes and not necessarily worry about what could or might not happen next year.
Yeah. Do you see it being used at all for the midterms, or do you see it? How do you see it playing politically?
I think it's too in the weeds for most people to understand, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think about my parents in Iowa, even though it's a very agriculture focused state and the Farm Bureau is working with us. But if I were to say WOTUS to my parents, they would give me that, like, I have a third eye sort of look. So I don't know that it matters to most average American. I know I just crushed you, but
I know it's so near and dear, but yes, I get the same reaction of like, you do what? And what is WOTUS again? And why do I? Yeah. For some of us, it's like it's everything, but for others, it's what is that? You're just throwing words at me. I guess for industry overall, what do you see as top environmental issues today? I mean, is WOTUS at the top of the list? Is there others that like top two, top three?
Yeah, I would say WOTUS is definitely up there. Those air issues that I mentioned are probably number two. And then some of the surface water permit issues are probably number three, I would say.
And how much are you seeing the PM 2.5? Is that when you talk about air issues, because the coarse particulates kind of status quo, do you see the PM 2.5 as the number one, or do you see the silica dust being more important?
I actually think the PM 2.5, since they're likely to reduce it, anyway, that's kind of what we're hearing out of EPA. I think our members are more concerned about that and reducing the number. I mean, what we're hearing on the MSHA silica side is a lot of it will look just like the OSHA bill or the OSHA reg that most of our members are already following if they have an asphalt plant or a ready mix plant on their facility. So I think that one's more status quo, whereas the reduction in the 2.5 could affect more people.
Yeah, how do you see that playing out? I mean, any indication on like how much it's going to go down limit-wise, or the impact it might have on members and industry?
We are kind of collecting a lot of that information on how it will affect our membership and the cost burden. One of the big things that we try to focus on in our comments on regulations like that is how it affects small businesses, because if we can prove that there will be a significant cost increase to small business, that is a good way that we can push back on some of these regulations. But that takes a lot of legwork on our end. And usually, you know, it could be confidential information that our members might not want to share with us. But if we just get, you know, general numbers, that can really help us when putting together our arguments.
Yeah, I guess you may not have this right in front of you, but for membership, what's the breakdown of like small business, quarry operators, aggregate suppliers versus large? Like what's for your members, how does that break down?
So 70% of our members are small business owners.
So huge impact, huge issue for them.
Yes. And honestly, WOTUS as well. And that's why a lot of the arguments we use in pushing back is the cost factor. right? The big guys can afford some of the mitigation and whatnot that they need to do, or to hire an environmental lawyer or whatever needs to happen, whereas our small guys can't do that. And so we want to be sure that we are working hard for our entire membership. And since most of our members are the small businesses, we really try to focus on that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also tougher for a small business to have like an in-house team, not only on the environmental permitting compliance side, but even just dealing with like your role on the regulatory and government affairs. They don't necessarily have a dedicated person to that. It's an owner operator that's juggling 20 different jobs.
That's true, but you know what's really interesting is those are usually our folks that have the best relationships with members of Congress. Because they have been in the community for so long, their name everybody knows, they probably go to church or went to high school with said member of Congress or something. So we really rely on those small owner operators for our grassroots efforts, and to continue those relationships with those members of Congress, so that when we need something in that area, or that member might sit on a committee that's important to us, that we can go to that specific NSSGA member and ask them to do that outreach.
Yeah, and I'm sure they're also, they're much closer to not only the environmental or regulatory issues, but also the economic, because they're covering all of those departments within a company.
A company, yeah, exactly.
I guess final question, is there anything else for major regulations or court cases that you're tracking that can really have a substantial impact on the industry that we haven't already kind of touched on today?
So we are still following the West Virginia versus EPA court case. And, even though it was focused on power plants, we're interested to see how that affects some of the other regulations that have already come out of the administration, and ones that we might see in the future, and how that limits some of their regulatory ability. So definitely following that. Like I said, the regulations at DOL is definitely at the top of our list. And then NEPA is another that I didn't mention, but this administration has rolled back what the last administration did on NEPA. And they're looking to do a phase 2 here in the coming months that would slow down that IIJA money coming out even more, as well as increase costs on projects and slow down the timelines. So the whole point of what the last administration did on NEPA was to speed up a lot of those large projects. And what this administration has done is now rolled that back to what it was before, and potentially even extend those timelines beyond what they were previously. So definitely following that issue. And then honestly, the implementation of IIJA in kind of all capacities is something that we're following nonstop, because it's not only at DOT, it's not only at DOE, but there's also some things at HUD related to our products and how this money is getting out the door. And we specifically have been following the Buy America edition. There was a provision in IIJA that expanded Buy America to all construction materials. And we've been working on that issue for at least the last 2 years, if not the last 3 years, because there was similar language included in a different non-related Senate bill. And we were able to get an exemption in this previous Senate bill for stone, sand, gravel, and cementitious materials that was meant to include cement as well as asphalt binder. And so basically what they did for IIJA is they picked up that language and they dropped it in IIJA. So the industry has an exemption because we do have some members that import from the islands, that import from Canada, Mexico. So what we are just making sure that the administration implements the law as it was intended and how our exemption was written. And so that, has made us stay in close contact with the Buy America office, with OMB, with FHWA as they put out their guidance and so forth, because we've been hearing about a lot of confusion out in the States. that I don't even think state DOTs all realize that the industry has an exemption, and our members are still having to prove where their product comes from in certain states. And so we're working on some resources that our members could use as they go to their state DOTs or as they go and bid on projects, so that we're not having to continuously have that conversation. And also working with AASHTO, they've been really helpful when it comes to that too. But
yeah, so it sounds like the two big bills that passed and are getting signed today are going to keep you busy for a while in terms of like current issues tracking for membership.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing I would say is, yes, it was fantastic that this bill got passed, but there's a lot of oversight that needs to continue to happen in order to ensure that it continues to help our members over the next 5 years. So really just staying on top of all of that, staying on top of the regs that kind of surround that, as well as, you know, making sure that our members can continue to do business, whether it's on kind of the mining withdrawal side or some of the other things we're seeing out in the states and in Congress.
Well, I appreciate you jumping on this morning, Michele. Thank you very much for sharing kind of a viewpoint on one particular part of the building construction materials industry and some of the environmental issues that you're tracking. So really appreciate you jumping on here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. And you know, I hope I was helpful. And if folks have questions, you know how to get a hold of me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Michele. Thanks.
Thank you.